Today is, as I said earlier, the second sermon in a three-sermon series based on the theme of the road less traveled. And it comes out of a long-distance road trip that Toby and I took a couple of weeks ago, 2,000 miles through New Mexico, Texas, and into Louisiana. Last week, we talked about the power of taking the road less traveled, trying new things, leaning into risks. And we spent a significant amount of time talking about one road in particular that very few folks choose to take, and that's the road of standing up and speaking out. In a world that advocates the alternative, well-trod road of not rocking the boat. Today, I want to talk about another road less traveled, and that is a road navigating at night. As most of you know from my sermon last week, Toby and I spent part of our vacation, at least, in a place called Big Bend National Park. Now, there's 63 parks in the United States. Big Bend is the 15th largest with over 800,000 acres. It's right on the Mexico border, far West Texas, which also makes it one of the most remote national parks in the country. It's known for its gorgeous mountains and canyons and deserts, but one of the things that Big Bend is most known for is not the land, but the sky, and more specifically, the night sky. Now, let me say 7 words that I can guarantee you are not being said in any other church this Sunday morning. You ready? Let's pause now for an astronomy lesson. I want to take like 30 seconds, do a little science, and then offer a story. So first, the science. In astronomy, there is a thing called the Bortles scale, B-O-R-T-L-E-S, the Bortles scale, which measures light sources in the night sky on a scale of 1 to 9. So, for example, New York City, like most major cities, is a 9 because there's so much light here that it blocks out almost all of the night sky, except for maybe a full moon. On the other hand, there are a few, very few places in this country that are a 1 on the Bortles scale, which means there's absolutely no artificial human-created light whatsoever. The clarity of the night sky is 100%. Now, that only happens in places like far northeast Montana and Death Valley, most of Alaska, and Big Bend National Park. So here's my little story. One night during our time, I decided to drive into the park at night to see the sky. It was about 9 p.m., got in the Buick that you heard about last week, and went into the park, and I pulled off on a dirt road and turned off the engine. It was absolutely silent. There was nothing except for the ringing in my ears because I wasn't used to the silence. So I sat there for a minute in the dark, a little scared to get out of my car, frankly. But finally I got out, and I shut the door and stood there literally arm's length from the car. And after a moment, the dashboard lights started to fade, and then there was nothing except total darkness. I mean, to the point where I couldn't even see the car, which was arm's length in front of me. I had to reach out and go, is it still there? Yes, okay, it's right there. The first thing that came to mind, of course, was our first few lines of Genesis. In the beginning, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. I pulled out my cell phone, and I took this beautiful, fabulous photograph of that moment I want to share with you. Travis, can you show it? Yeah. Just wanted everybody to experience it. Thank you. Copies are available after the service. It was scary. It was humbling. It was disorienting, but I stood there and I waited because one of the park rangers had told me earlier in the day, just stand there and look. She said, you won't see anything right away, but give your eyes a moment to adjust. Just keep looking, and then all will unfurl in front of you. And sure enough, slowly my eyes started to adjust and stars just started popping everywhere. And God said, let there be light. There was Orion, there was the Big Dipper, there was the North Star, like neon signs up there. But what was most incredible was this band, kind of like, I don't know, mist or fog that arced the entire sky. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me, I was looking at the Milky Way without a telescope, without binoculars, just standing there with my very, very heavy bifocals, looking at the Milky Way. It was right there. I felt like I was standing in the middle of the Big Bang. I mean, it was such a, well, it was a holy experience. I mean, for sure, it put Genesis in a whole new light. But it also reminded me of the great wisdom in the skies. Genesis 1:14 through 15 tells us as much. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, for seasons, and for days, and for years. The very first chapter of Genesis tells us that the heavens are a place to look for signs and seasons, a place to glean wisdom. When God said, let there be light, perhaps God meant not only literal light, but also the light of knowledge and wisdom. The Bible is full of the examples of wisdom from the heavens. In fact, today, our Bible study just wrapped up a wonderful study by Reverend Corellis Bryant. Thanks to Kevin and Tracy for organizing this for us. And Reverend Bryant did a study entitled Dancing with Darkness. He may be watching right now. We should give him a little love because that was a great series. In that series, Corellis drew on his own work and some of the work of Dr. Barbara Brown Taylor, exploring the power of darkness through biblical examples like Abraham receiving the covenant at night in the dark, or Jacob wrestling with the angel at night in the dark, or the feeding of the 5,000. You know, that miracle actually occurred in the evening, at night. You know, in our modern world, we tend to dismiss the night as, you know, it's a time to sleep. It's a time of passive waiting for the light to come so that we can get up and achieve and do and be. And yet, it's only in the night that we truly understand who we are, especially when we stop, let our eyes adjust, and see what unfolds. Let me put it to you in terms of a little tour. Okay, right now, those of us on site are sitting in a church in the neighborhood known as Murray Hill, New York. Now, we've been in this little neighborhood for going on almost 175 years. It's our home. It's how we define ourselves. It's how we see ourselves. Just like most of us define ourselves where we live. But sadly, we as human beings rarely see past that narrow definition of home, that is the few blocks around which we live, or maybe via the limits of our city, or even via the narrow limits of our country. Friends, these are artificial boundaries, human-created boundaries, boundaries that then give rise to other artificial constraints like race, gender, religion, all things that drive so much of the violence and hatred and judgment in our world. My message today is that we must learn to see past these limited human boundaries. We have to stop. We have to look up. We have to let our eyes adjust. And when we do, it all begins to unfold in front of us. Literally. I mean, even in bright New York City, we know deep down that our true home is bigger than Murray Hill and New York City, and even the United States, because we as human beings are all inhabitants of a tiny, kind of unremarkable planet known as Earth. Now, as residents of this tiny planet, we are also part of a solar system that is 3 billion miles across, with like 9-ish planets orbiting around a fairly sizable star known as the Sun. And as residents of that solar system, we are also part of a much bigger home called a galaxy known as the Milky Way, which is about 100,000 light years across, with 400 billion other stars and planets. I mean, let me break it down. Let me put it in terms of what we know. Planet Earth is like MABC, our home. Our solar system is like Murray Hill. It's a cozy little neighborhood that is part of a much bigger city, the Milky Way. Which means when we are lucky enough to actually see the Milky Way with our own eyes, we're looking at it from the inside. I mean, think about that. Let me actually show you a visual aid I prepared. You're welcome. Travis, can you show? This is like one of those signs, you are here. There's the Milky Way with all of its spiral bands. We, in our little kind of solar system, are up in the northeast corner. You know, appropriate since we're in the northeast. I'm sure that parallels. But that's where we are. So when we actually think about the context, you know, standing on Earth looking out at the Milky Way, it's like being in a tiny apartment in Murray Hill looking out the window at all of Manhattan. But that's only the beginning, because the Milky Way is one of approximately 200 billion other galaxies, and so it goes on and on and on. When we stop, when we let our eyes adjust and look up to the wisdom of the heavens, something very important happens. Something very critical begins to unfold in front of us. And that's our interconnected nature, the interconnected nature of our existence. Friends, we are all neighbors. No matter where we live on this planet, no matter what color our skin, no matter what language we speak, no matter what person we love, or what God we worship, we are all neighbors. We are all of the same species from the same planet, all nestled in the suburb of the same solar system within the city of our galaxy and in the vast country of our little corner of the universe, and on and on. We are all part of creation. And God said, let there be light. And here's the thing. I mean, when we start to see that connection, I mean really see that connection, our vision starts to change. Not only up, but out. Recently, I've been reading Michelle Obama's book, The Light That We Carry. My friend Becky's reading it too. Anybody here reading it or read it? Yeah, see hands. It's a great book. And one of the things that she talks about, that Michelle Obama talks about, is how, notwithstanding our interconnected nature, so many on this planet are made to feel invisible, like they don't matter. In her book, she talks about living in a world where growing up, she not only didn't feel seen, she was utterly dismissed. And she tells a story of being told by a guidance counselor in high school that she shouldn't apply to an Ivy League school because she was, quote, not Princeton material. Wonder what that person's thinking now. Yeah. She also shares the story of Stacey Abrams, the politician, lawyer, voting rights activist, author, and past member of the Georgia House of Representatives, who was invited to the governor's mansion as valedictorian of her high school, only to be stopped by a guard at the front door who didn't believe she was a guest. Notwithstanding our interconnected nature, so many on this planet are made to feel invisible. This week in his State of the Union, President Biden talked about another example, the millions of Americans who, quote, have been left behind or treated like they're invisible, and who are now part of the staggering toll of addiction. The New York Times this week noted that we now lose more Americans to deaths of despair, drugs, alcohol, suicide, every 10 days than the total of all the service members killed in 2 decades of war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Whether it's addiction or mental health or race or sexuality, religion, ethnicity, we must stop. Let our eyes adjust by remembering who we are. One people on one planet. So that when we look out at each other, the truth of our deep human connection unfolds. I can't help but think of a line from our call to worship that Gail read for us. Then I shall not be put to shame, having my eyes fixed on all your commandments. I want to leave you this morning with a poem that I love entitled "The Light We Leave Behind" by a poet named Kenneth Ronkowitz. And here's the first few lines. A star chart tells me that the star I'm seeing tonight is 500 light years away. It may have died 499 years ago, and I'm still seeing its last light. Stars are born, they live and they die. What is the light that remains when we leave? That's the question we must ask ourselves every day. What is the light that remains when we leave? What is our legacy? Friends, there's nothing more important in this life than the legacy of human connection, of healing, of love that bonds every inhabitant of this planet together as one. And the only way that's going to happen is for us to start by looking to our source, by looking to the heavens. Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light." And the people said, "Amen."